Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? It's late where I am, the kind of late where the air outside turns thin and cold, smelling faintly of ozone and forgotten rain. Look around your room, notice the shadows in the corners, the ones that seem thicker than the rest, almost like black velvet spilled over the walls. That's the feeling we're chasing tonight, the feeling of being the only one awake, the only one moving, the only one who might just see something that shouldn't be there. You know, the kind of story that starts with you thinking you're safe, but ends with the grim realization that maybe you shouldn't have bothered locking the door at all. But hey, at least you're not alone now. If the worst happens, you'll have a fantastic last thought. Wow, I really should have subscribed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're settling in and what hour the clock just struck for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're already seated, aren't you? You know the feeling. That deep, bone-weary exhaustion that hits when the world has finally shut down. You've had a long day, or maybe a long night. The details don't matter much now, do they? What matters is this: you are on the last bus. The very last one that drags its steel frame through the cold, dead streets of a city that pretends to sleep. The air inside is stale and dry, the heating system groans, and the only light comes from the dim yellow-white glow of the overhead fluorescent panels, casting a sickly sheen on the worn vinyl seats. You chose your spot carefully, right? Middle of the bus, away from the back axle where the noise is worst, far from the driver so you don't feel obligated to make small talk. You wanted solitude. You wanted the space to feel the quiet rush of the tires on the asphalt, the almost meditative emptiness of it all. The previous few stops had been just brief pauses, the hiss of the air brakes, the mechanical sigh of the doors opening and then closing on nothing. It was liberating. You had your pick of every seat. An entire vast, rolling public conveyance all to yourself. You could stretch your legs across the aisle, rest your head against the cool, grubby window pane, and let your mind drift. You even joked to yourself that you should probably put your bag on the seat next to you, just so the ghostly passengers have to stand. Speaking of ghostly passengers, you ever hear about spontaneous human combustion? It's a genuine, terrifying phenomenon where a person supposedly ignites without any external source of fire. While science offers some theories about a wick effect involving body fat and external heat, the historical accounts, some involving victims who were completely sober and simply sitting in a chair, are chilling. It's the ultimate, horrific, non-consensual exit from the world. You're sitting on a bus right now, and one tiny malfunction in the internal wiring, one frayed connection, and maybe you're the next entry in the obscure annals of inexplicable fire deaths. But don't worry, the bus is usually the safest place. Usually, you see the next stop approaching, the neon glow of a late-night pharmacy sign bleeding into the street. It's the final stop before the route leaves the city center entirely and plunges into the dark, sparsely populated suburban and industrial stretches. You brace yourself for the possibility of a fellow nocturnal traveler, but the street is silent. No one. The bus sighs to a stop, the doors open, and for a moment the world is perfectly still. Then, just as the driver's hand reaches for the door switch, you see it. A figure. They aren't running, they aren't shuffling. They simply appear from the shadow of the brick bus shelter, moving with a kind of stiff, almost mechanical deliberation. Tall, thin, clad in something dark and heavy like a winter coat that's several seasons too old, even if it's not the kind of weather for it. No hat, no visible features beyond the general outline of a head held slightly too low. They step onto the bus, the single-syllable crunch of their dark boots echoing unnervingly on the ribbed rubber floor. You instinctively pull your feet back, a small, irrational formality. The doors hiss shut behind them, sealing the two of you inside this metal cocoon. Now remember the vast, beautiful expanse of empty seats you had surrounding you. Enough seats for a small concert. Enough space to host an awkward high school dance. But this passenger does not choose the empty seat directly across the aisle from you, which would maintain a polite, conventional distance. They don't take a window seat 2 rows up, where they could watch the passing night in peace. They move past the front seats, past the rows parallel to you, and they stop, directly behind you. That's a classic move in the horror playbook, isn't it? It's like when you're standing alone in the dark kitchen and the power flickers and you think, I guess I'm making a sequel to my own death. This person, this sudden late-night anomaly, chose the seat that eliminates all spatial privacy. You feel the vinyl cushion depressed right behind your shoulder blades, a solid, immediate presence where there was only emptiness seconds ago. Your internal alarm, that tiny, high-pitched whistle reserved for moments of acute, low-stakes social violation, screams at you. You want to turn, offer a terse, "Can I help you?" or at least a confused, questioning glance. But you don't. You freeze. Because deep down, you know this isn't about politeness or seating etiquette. This is about intent. This is about proximity used as a weapon. It reminds you of the old Germanic folklore surrounding the doppelganger effect. The belief wasn't just that a spectral double existed, it was that seeing your own doppelganger, or having someone else see it, was a guaranteed warning of impending, usually violent death. But the obscure detail is that sometimes these doubles didn't look exactly like you. They looked like a wrong version of you, or sometimes just a figure that mirrored your action in a slightly unsettling way, like a dark reflection. This passenger sitting right behind you feels like a dark reflection of your own sudden, solitary journey. A silent, immediate, and unwelcome shadow. You try to rationalize it. Maybe they get motion sick and need a forward-facing seat. Maybe they have a fear of facing the back of the bus. Maybe the only thing that gives their meaningless existence purpose is the subtle psychological torture of sitting too close to strangers. Researchers still disagree on whether the Bermuda Triangle incidents can be wholly attributed to natural phenomena or if a factor of unknown origin is at play. But honestly, they should focus their attention on the statistically improbable behavior of strangers on empty public transit. That's the real mystery of the modern world. The bus pulls away from the curb, a slow, determined rumble. You shift your weight, settling your head a little more firmly against the hard plastic of the backrest. The air now feels different. It's no longer the spacious, comforting quiet of a solo ride. It's the confined, pressurized silence of two people who are trying desperately to pretend the other doesn't exist. Only one of them is failing spectacularly by invading the other's personal space. You swallow, your throat dry. You notice the absence of sound from behind you. No sigh, no rustle of a coat, no shifting of feet. Just a solid, unnerving weight. I tried to tell the driver I didn't have a ticket, you might have whispered to yourself earlier. He just winked and said, "The Grim Reaper has already paid you fare." That's the kind of dark humor that usually gets you through the night. But right now, the humor is sticking in your throat. You feel the slow, insistent rhythm beginning to build behind your head. It's not just the silence anymore. It's the expectation of a sound that is even worse than silence. You clench your jaw, ready for the next phase of this deeply uncomfortable late-night journey. You know it's coming. The sound that will break the calm. You're trying to focus on the blur of the passing streetlights, the way the dark, skeletal trees are briefly illuminated and then devoured by the night again, but the focus keeps collapsing inward, drawn by the presence at your back. You can feel the heat, or maybe the absence of heat radiating from the passenger's chest directly into the soft tissue at the back of your skull. It's the kind of proximity that makes the hairs on your neck stand up, not from a draft, but from a purely animalistic, territorial distress. The bus is traveling fast now, the road straightening into the long, dark stretch between neighborhoods. The engine's drone is a low, monotonous counterpoint to the silence. But it's not truly silent anymore, is it? Because that rhythmic pressure you were expecting has materialized, not as a cough or a sigh or the inevitable annoying tapping of a phone screen, but as something far more intimate, far more disconcerting. It's the sound of wet breath. It's not a deep, sleeping snore. It's not a regular, healthy inhale-exhale. It's too close, too heavy, and there's a damp quality to it. A subtle, disturbing liquid sound at the end of each inhale, like air being pulled through a half-clogged passage. Hiss, fuff, fuff, squish, fuff, thuff, fuff, duh, squish. It's quiet enough that the engine should drown it out, but your mind has prioritized it, isolating it from the mundane noise and amplifying it until it's the loudest thing in the universe. It sounds like something that has been pulled from water and is struggling to acclimatize to the dry air of the bus. You realize you are holding your own breath, listening with an almost manic intensity. You try to synchronize your breath with theirs, a foolish, desperate attempt to normalize the rhythm, but their cadence is erratic. It rushes in short bursts, then drags out into long, almost impossible pauses, making you feel lightheaded in sympathy. It's the breathing of something that's injured, or perhaps something that simply doesn't need to breathe, but is doing it as a cruel, performative flourish for your benefit. You think of the classic chilling ghost story element, the entity that only reveals itself through a sound that belongs to a living thing, but sounds fundamentally wrong. It's like a famous case of the Wen ghost photo, a seemingly supernatural image that gained global recognition for its unsettling clarity, only to later be debunked. But the sheer visceral dread it caused worldwide demonstrated humanity's core terror of seeing life where there should be none. The true horror isn't the ghost, it's the feeling of something wrongly alive. And the breathing behind you is perfectly, sickeningly, wrongly alive. You try to move your head to the side, pressing your ear against the cold glass, hoping to escape the direct line of the sound. But moving feels like a massive declarative statement, an admission that you know they are there and that they are bothering you. The social contract, even in this moment of primal fear, demands that you pretend everything is fine. You joke to yourself, I knew I should have worn my noise-canceling headphones, but I only brought the ones that cancel out the sound of my own internal screaming. You try to distract yourself. You pull out your phone, not to look at it, but to look past it. You remember seeing a documentary about a fringe theory known as the chronovisor, an obscure Catholic urban legend claiming the existence of a device capable of recording and displaying past events. The tidbit, often forgotten, is the claim that the device could sometimes intercept images from other realities, glimpses of alternate, distorted histories. You wonder, sitting here in the bus, if the image in your phone screen's reflection is a glimpse into an alternate reality where a healthy, normal human is sitting behind you, or if the grim reflection you're avoiding is exactly what's supposed to be there. You focus on the texture of the seat in front of you, the little woven patterns in the fabric. You notice a small, dried smear of something dark near the plastic handle. Old gum, dried coffee. You fixate on this small, banal detail, willing it to take over your attention, but the FFT squish always pulls you back. You remember reading about a dark period in American history, the true mainstream horror of the Bloody Benders, a family of serial killers operating in Kansas during the 1870s who preyed on travelers. They ran an inn, seated victims over a trap door, and then bludgeoned them from behind before disposing of the bodies. It's a chilling reminder that the worst threats often come from the people who invite you in, who sit just behind you, or who are simply waiting at the end of a long, lonely road. You briefly think, well, at least this bus doesn't have a trap door, just the emergency exit window, which is looking increasingly appealing. The intensity of the sound increases slightly. You feel a puff of air, damp and cool, ruffle the tiny, baby-fine hairs just above the collar of your shirt. It was so close it felt like a deliberate, controlled exhalation aimed right at you. You tighten your grip on your phone, knuckles white. You know you need to check, to confirm, to turn around and make the unknown known. But the fear is a thick, paralyzing oil. It's interesting, isn't it? Researchers disagree on whether the initial feelings of dread and anxiety are purely psychological responses to environmental factors, or if they represent an actual subconscious detection of infrasound or unknown energy fields. You are experiencing an extreme case of this debate right now. Is it the isolation, the darkness, the late hour creating this feeling, or is the thing behind you genuinely radiating something that your body knows is pure danger? The breathing pauses again. This time, the pause is too long. It stretches the boundaries of what a human body can sustain. You count the seconds in your head. 1, 2, 3, your own chest tightens, a physiological mirror of the impossibility unfolding behind you. 8, 9, 10 seconds. You could swear you hear a slight internal click during this silence, like something small being adjusted inside a mechanism. Then, the wet rhythmic sound restarts, perfectly timed to shatter the momentary peace. You tell yourself, if I die, at least I won't have to worry about my student loan debt. The horror is just a slightly accelerated form of financial planning. You know you can't keep ignoring it. The breathing is a declaration. The next step will require visual confirmation, no matter how brief or indirect. You begin to plot your move, knowing that a direct confrontation is still too much, but you can no longer afford to remain blind. You reach up, your fingers brushing against the plastic casing of the rearview mirror mounted above the driver, preparing for the most terrifying check of your life. Your hand hovers near the plastic housing of the rearview mirror. It's not the wide-angle safety mirror used by the driver, but the small, secondary one angled perfectly to show the first few rows of the passenger section. You know precisely what angle you need, a minute fraction of movement, to bring the passenger behind you into view. You feel like a jewel thief or a bomb disposal expert. Every millimeter of movement is an overwhelming risk. You shift your fingers, a whisper of plastic against plastic. The mirror tilts just enough. The driver's area, the empty seats ahead of you, the reflections of the sodium lamps streaking past, all of it comes into focus. And then, the mirror catches the image of the passenger. It's a quick, indistinct shape. You see only the upper portion of the seat and, reflected at the bottom edge of the mirror, the crown of the person's head. It's dark hair, or maybe just the darkness of the heavy coat pulled up and around the head. The head is perfectly still, resting against the top of the seat. The reflection is too murky, too distorted by the cheap plastic, the passing light, and the sheer terror gripping your optic nerve to make out any features. But you see the outline, and it confirms the size, the bulk, the wrongness of the proximity. And then, in the instant before you decide you've seen enough and flip the mirror back, there's a tiny, fleeting movement that defies the stillness. A flash. Not a reflection of light, but a shape that seemed to move within the coat, or perhaps a change in the outline of the head itself. It's gone before you can register it, blurring into the passing lights. You snap your hand away, breathing shallowly. Was that a trick of the light, the motion of the bus, or did the shape of the passenger just shift in a way that flesh and bone should not? You're reminded of the mainstream horror of the Winchester Mystery House. Built on a non-stop, decades-long construction frenzy supposedly dictated by spirits, it's a physical manifestation of ceaseless anxiety and fear of the dead. It's all staircases that lead to ceilings and doors that open to sheer drops. A house designed to confuse, which is exactly how your mind feels right now. That fleeting reflection, that shape that wasn't quite a face, is a mental dead end, a phantom door opening to a drop. You press your back against the seat again, trying to flatten yourself, to become a part of the upholstery, invisible and inert. But the wet breathing immediately restarts, seeming to gain a strange, aggressive confidence now that it knows you've looked. You try a different approach, analyzing the physics of the sound. It's so close, yet it seems slightly muffled, almost as if the passenger's face is pressed against something soft. The vinyl seat back, perhaps. But the seat is flat and hard. You picture them leaning their entire weight forward, their head bowed, their face submerged in the material just behind your back. The image is disturbingly intimate and deeply repulsive. You recall an obscure tidbit about the Mothman prophecies. Beyond the cryptid sightings, the story is often punctuated by reports of phantom phone calls and strange predictive dreams experienced by the residents of Point Pleasant before the bridge collapse. These calls and visions were said to be indistinct, fleeting moments of information that, when combined, spelled disaster. Your glimpse in the mirror felt like one of those fleeting moments, a piece of information too vague to act on, but too chilling to dismiss, a fragment of a warning. The bus hits a slight bump in the road, and you hear a distinct thud from behind, heavier than expected, followed by a slight scraping noise. It sounds like something large and stiff shifting position. Maybe they have a heavy bag on their lap. Maybe they are carrying an antique lamp. Maybe they are carrying a sack full of disappointment and a few spare organs. Why do undertakers always smell bad? Because they're always a little bit behind on their paperwork, you internally quip, letting the dark humor act like a tiny necessary shield. You find yourself doing the quick inventory of everything you know about human movement. Humans shift, humans sigh. Humans fidget with their phones, clear their throats, tap their feet, or scratch an itch. This passenger has done none of those things, save for the slight shift after the bus hit the bump. They are a monument of uncomfortable rigidity. You wonder about the psychological profile of someone who chooses to violate spatial norms in this way. Is this a person, or is this the manifestation of some universal, low-grade fear of the unwanted shadow? Researchers disagree on whether chronic feelings of being watched, known as ocular surveillance anxiety, are a symptom of general paranoia or an evolutionary defense mechanism against hidden predators. You're leaning heavily towards the hidden predator theory right now, given the wet, non-stop breathing. You need to know what that flash of movement was. You need to see the reflection again, but you can't risk turning the mirror manually. You devise a new plan. You will pretend to look at your phone for an extended period, moving your head just slightly, using the curvature of the dark side window, your secondary private mirror, to catch a less direct, more ghostly reflection of the passenger. This requires a level of steady, deceptive calm that you don't feel you possess, but you know you must try. The memory of the flash in the mirror persists. It was almost like the coat had been briefly drawn back, revealing a pale, angular shape, perhaps an elbow or something much worse. You try another joke, though it's barely a whisper in your mind. I told my doctor I was worried about my social anxiety. He prescribed me a long bus ride at 3 a.m. He said, "The isolation will cure you, or the encounter will end you. Either way, problem solved." The bus is now deep into the isolated section of the route. The street lights are sparse. The buildings are dark warehouses and silent factories. The city is officially behind you. The only light source is internal, and the intermittent, blinding flash of a faraway car's headlights as it passes. The breathing remains, your constant, unwelcome companion. The rigidity of the figure behind you is the next thing you must investigate. You need to understand why they are so stiff, so unnaturally still. Is it fear, control, or simply the limitation of their form? The bus slows for a scheduled stop, a small, deserted strip mall entrance. No movement outside. The bus doors open, and the cold, damp night air rushes in, carrying the smell of industrial exhaust and wet pavement. For a long moment, the passenger behind you doesn't move. You hold your breath, hoping they will get off, that this intrusion will end. But they don't. The doors hiss shut. The silence returns, heavier than before. The rigidity is the core of the problem, and you can feel it cold and solid just inches from your head. The sheer, unnatural rigidity of the passenger is now the dominant feature of the encounter. It's worse than any movement would be. If they were squirming, tapping, or coughing, they would at least be conforming to the baseline rules of human behavior on public transport, the desperate, continuous negotiation for comfort. But the figure behind you is a flawless statue of stillness. You have been sitting here for what feels like an hour, listening to that wet, sickening breath, and yet the body hasn't shifted its weight, hasn't adjusted its posture, hasn't even produced the tiny, involuntary micro-movements of a sleeping person. This stillness, you realize, suggests two equally terrifying possibilities. The first is that they are exercising an almost superhuman level of control, a menacing, deliberate performance designed to maximize your discomfort and fear. The second is that the structure holding them upright is not built for comfort or negotiation, but for pure, rigid containment. You remember the mainstream horror of the Issei Sagawa case, where a man committed an act of cannibalism and was later released, walking free due to legal loopholes. The horror of that case is not just the act itself, but the chilling realization that some monsters are not only real, but are permitted to exist in the mundane world, walking among us, sometimes even sitting right behind us on a late-night bus. This passenger's rigidity feels like the careful self-control of something that knows its true nature would shatter the illusion of civility. You try to move your hand to your lap, a simple, necessary gesture, but even that small action feels loud and self-betraying. The silence from behind is so absolute that you imagine every fiber of your cheap nylon jacket is screaming as it brushes against the seat. You find yourself doing a detailed, involuntary inspection of the seat fabric around your head. The vinyl has been patched in places, the dark blue surface crisscrossed with tiny, almost invisible cuts and scratches. You wonder who sat here before you. What late-night travelers, what forgotten workers, what drunk partygoers. And then your mind drifts to a much darker thought. What if the seat itself is not designed to hold a standard human form? What if the unnatural stiffness of the passenger is because they are merely resting on a frame, and the coat is not clothing, but a kind of portable disguise? It's interesting to note the obscure tidbit concerning the Silent Hill otherworld lore, where the town's geography and structure shifts based on the protagonist's repressed trauma. The external world, the normal bus remains constant, but the reality of the small space behind you is warping, transforming into something rigid, personalized, and terrifyingly silent. This passenger is forcing your Silent Hill onto the seat directly behind you. You manage a deep internal sigh, a slow release of air that you pray doesn't register a sound to the keen, wet breathing behind you. I asked the ghost why he was so stiff, you think, the dark joke barely forming in your exhausted mind. He said, "I'm just going through a bit of rigor mortising." A terrible joke, but the very act of constructing it offers a split second of mental distance. The bus accelerates, the engine pitch rising, and for a glorious few seconds, the sound of the engine drowns out the FF to squish. But even when you can't hear it, you can feel it, the pressure, the presence, the sheer wrongness of the body shape. You try to reason away the rigidity, maybe they are sleeping upright. But who sleeps with that precise, heavy, forward lean? You realize they must be very close to the edge of the seat, almost touching your back, because you can feel the minimal flex of the vinyl with the slightest movement of your own shoulders. It is a violation of space so profound it feels almost supernatural. You recall a dark historical fact about the radium girls, young women in the early 20th century who painted luminous watch dials. They were told the radium was harmless, and some even pointed their brushes with their lips. The insidious, slow-acting poison rigidified their bones, caused their jaws to literally crumble, and produced a terrible, glowing horror that only became apparent years later. The passenger's stillness feels like the terminal phase of some hidden internal decay, a structural rigidity that precedes collapse. It's the horror of something that was flexible and alive, now irrevocably locked into a single, unnatural position. Scholarly debate phrasing time, historians still argue whether the extreme self-flagellation and rigidity practiced by certain medieval ascetic orders was purely an expression of religious devotion or a manifestation of deep-seated psychological trauma. The man behind you feels like a dark, modern-day ascetic punishing himself, or, more likely, punishing you with his flawless, terrifying immobility. You know you can't turn around. You know the dark humor is fading. You need a distraction, something to give you the nerve to even breathe normally again. You remember another joke, the last flicker of self-deprecating wit you have left. My dating profile says I'm looking for a partner who is passionate, mysterious, and silent. Turns out, I just found a corpse on my couch. You suppress a dry, choked laugh. Your phone is still in your hand. It's your only tool, your only window. You decide to use it not for light, but for a deliberate, performative action. You need to create an external focus, a reason to move your hands, and, critically, to use the reflective properties of the screen. The next stage of confrontation must be indirect, utilizing the screen's glow to illuminate the shadow without exposing your face. You brace yourself, preparing to raise the screen to manufacture the faux text message. This feels like the most dangerous move yet because the light will not just show you the passenger, it will briefly show you to the passenger. You bring the phone up, your thumb moving with agonizing slowness over the power button. The action itself feels cinematic, a slow-motion moment where the world holds its breath, waiting for the flash of light. You turn the screen brightness down to the absolute minimum, a pale, ghost-white glow, just enough to simulate activity. You pretend to type, your eyes scanning the window glass beside you. The glass is a mirror in this darkness, reflecting the entire passenger compartment, albeit distortedly. You hold the screen up, angled carefully, allowing the low light to spill just enough to cut through the oppressive blackness behind your head. You see it, the coat. It's heavy, dark, and utterly featureless, like a piece of industrial felt draped over a coat rack. It sits slightly higher than you expected, suggesting the passenger is abnormally tall, or perhaps sitting unnaturally straight. But the light does what it was intended to do. It illuminates the texture of the darkness behind you, and what you see in the reflection is not reassuring. The passenger's head is indeed bowed, pressed close to the seat back, justifying the suffocating proximity and the wet, muffled quality of the breathing. But the coat is not draped. It seems to be pulled tight, almost strained across the shoulders and the top of the head. It looks less like clothing and more like a covering, a protective shell. You notice something else, something small and profoundly disturbing. On the dark window, reflected in the faint light of your phone screen, you see a momentary sheen, a flicker of moisture on the passenger's side of the seat. It's too faint to be certain, but it looks like the vinyl is damp. The wet sound of the breathing suddenly makes horrifying sense. The passenger isn't just breathing wetly, they might be generating, or covered in, moisture. You try to move your fingers to simulate typing a text, but they shake uncontrollably. You think, this is worse than any horror movie I've ever seen, and I'm paying a $2 fare for the privilege. You remember the mainstream horror of the phantom clown sightings in the 2016 craze, where people reported seeing figures in clown masks simply standing, staring, or lurking by the side of the road. That horror was amplified by the lack of clear motivation, the simple, terrifying act of being present in a frightening way. This passenger is achieving the same effect, but with a horrifying, silent intimacy. They are performing the ultimate act of social haunting. The light is attracting something else. You see it glint, low down, near the passenger's feet in the reflection. It's hard and metallic, a small flash that vanishes as quickly as it appears. A buckle, a cane. Or maybe the bus just has a particularly aggressive rodent problem. What did the ghost bring to the party? A spooktacular selection of cold cuts, you joke, the grim pun failing to distract from the reality of the dampness and the metallic glint. You are acutely aware that the light you've created is now a beacon. Your head is illuminated, and the reflection of your eyes, wide and terrified, is staring directly into the reflected darkness where the passenger sits. You are looking at them. They are, by extension, looking at your reflected face. You remember an obscure tidbit about the black-eyed kids' folklore entities that resemble children but possess unnaturally mature voices and solid black eyes, whose main power is the ability to induce an overwhelming, paralyzing dread simply by asking to be let into your car or home. The passenger hasn't spoken, but the effect is identical. A creeping, soul-deep terror that freezes the victim into inaction. The proximity is the request. The wet breath is the paralyzing dread. You must stop looking. You must put the phone down. But just as your fingers move to lock the screen, you notice something in the window's reflection that sends a fresh wave of panic through you. It's not on the passenger. It's on the seat itself, right at the top, where your head almost touches the plastic. A tiny, almost invisible scratch mark, curved and deep, as if something sharp. Not the casual abrasion of a backpack zipper, but something harder and more precise, had been dug into the vinyl. Scholarly debate time. Researchers disagree on whether the psychological concept of pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces or patterns in random stimuli, is a cognitive error or a necessary evolutionary tool for survival. You are desperately hoping this scratch mark, this dampness, this metallic glint, and this terrifying rigidity are all just pareidolia, an illusion of your exhausted mind finding horror in mundane bus materials. But the FT squish argues otherwise. The bus hits another bump, and the metallic glint flashes again in the window reflection. This time, it seems to move slightly, a small, independent motion. You can't hold the light any longer. You lock the phone screen and drop it quickly back into your lap, plunging the compartment into relative darkness again. But the damage is done. You've looked. You've let them know you're aware. You lean forward, away from the wetness and the unnatural stillness, pressing your knees against the back of the seat in front of you. You decide that the next sound you hear will be the cue to pull the cord. You're ready to make a break for it, even if it means walking home in the cold, dead hours of the morning. You'd rather face the city's ghosts than the ones sitting inches behind your skull. I told my therapist I was feeling watched. He said, "That's normal, you're just self-conscious." Then he added, "But sometimes the walls really do have eyes, so maybe move to a forest. You need to get off this bus." But before you can commit to the escape, a new, unsettling noise begins, not from the passenger, but from the structure of the bus itself, directly beneath the passenger's seat. The new sound is subtle, quiet, and absolutely, unequivocally bone-chilling. It is a rattle, emanating not from the passenger's throat, but from the metal seat frame directly beneath them. It's a light, persistent tapping, like a small, loose object gently vibrating against the hollow metal tubing of the seat structure. Tap, 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 tap. It's not the rattle of a loose bolt or a poorly maintained fixture. That would be chaotic, random. This is steady, rhythmic, and incredibly light, like a delicate instrument being played by accident. It sounds unsettlingly like light bone on plastic. You sit completely still, trying to dissect the sound. It's coming from below the seat, near the floor. You picture the metallic glint you saw in the window reflection earlier. Did something fall? Did the passenger drop something small and hard? Or is the source of the rigidity now manifesting a new, audible consequence? The passenger's wet breathing continues over the tapping, a nauseating duet. The FF squish provides the terrifying melody, and the tap-tap provides the terrifying percussion. You think of the mainstream horror of the Dybbuk box, the supposed antique cabinet haunted by a restless, malicious spirit, a mainstream concept whose horror lies in the containment of something awful. The seat frame feels like a container now, and the tapping is the sound of something inside, something small and hard, trying to get out. You're sitting right next to the box, and you can hear the occupant scratching. What's the difference between a vampire and a tax collector? One only comes out at night, and the other can drain the life out of you completely legally. You have a tax collector and a vampire sitting behind you, wrapped up in a dark coat. The rhythm of the tapping begins to modulate. It's not a metronome, but it has a pulse, speeding up slightly, then pausing, almost as if it's reacting to the subtle changes in the bus's vibration or your own rising panic. You realize you have your hands clenched tightly on your thighs, and you are vibrating with suppressed tension. Is the tapping mimicking your own internal tremor? You remember the scratch marks you saw on the vinyl headrest in the reflection. You put the scratch marks, the dampness, the unnatural rigidity, the wet breath, and now the tapping together, and the synthesis is deeply, fundamentally inhuman. This is not a tired traveler. This is a deliberate, constructed presence. You recall an obscure tidbit related to the old Skinwalker Ranch lore, beyond the cattle mutilations and UFOs. There were reports of highly localized metallic scraping and clicking noises emanating from the ground, sometimes following individuals, sounds that seemed to defy the known physics of machinery or animals. The source of the sound was never found, yet the fear it generated was intense. Your tapping is localized, metallic, and feels deeply rooted in the ground beneath the passenger. You desperately need to confirm what is causing the tapping. You lean your head slightly to the left, trying to angle your ear closer to the seat frame, pretending to stretch your neck. This is a monumental effort. As you do this, the wet breathing suddenly seems to inhale deeply, a prolonged, sucking sound that makes the fine hairs on your left cheek feel cold. The tapping pauses. You freeze. Scholarly debate time. Researchers disagree on whether the anecdotal evidence of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, is simply confirmation bias or a sign of a deeper, non-linear connection between psychological states and external physical events. The passenger's breathing and the tapping are reacting to your body language and panic in a way that feels deliberately synchronized, violating all rules of coincidence. You hear a small shink sound, a faint, almost musical ring of metal on metal, and the tapping begins again. This time, it's slightly louder. You risk a slow glance down, trying to look at the floor of the bus just under the corner of the seat. The floor is covered in the standard dark industrial-grade rubber, slightly stained. You can't see anything. The sound is completely enclosed within the plastic shell of the seat. You try to use dark humor one more time to break the tension, but it's becoming hollow. Why did the skeleton go to the party alone? Because he didn't have anybody to go with. Also, all his friends were stuck in the seat frame of a late-night bus. A Lendiove night bus. The bus begins to slow. You see the faint, flashing amber lights of the turn signal in the front. Another stop. This one is scheduled, but you have passed all the major population points. The stops now are just isolated, low-lit shelters on the edges of the city's concrete sprawl. You anticipate the brief, glorious rush of cold air and the chance that the passenger will finally leave. The bus groans to a halt. The air brakes hiss. The doors open. The passenger behind you remains perfectly still. The wet breathing pauses. The tapping, however, does not stop. It continues its rhythmic tap-tap-tap, as if the cessation of external motion has only made its internal motion more pronounced. The tapping is not leaving the bus. And then, the unexpected happens. The driver, without closing the doors, says something quiet into his headset, a quick, mumbled phrase that you can't catch. And then, he turns off the bus, not the engine, just the main interior lights. The fluorescents die with a faint electrical pop, plunging the bus into near-total darkness, save for the emergency brake light and the green glow of the ticket reader. You are alone, in the dark, with the passenger and the rhythmic tapping. The darkness is absolute, a thick, swallowing blanket that seems to absorb all sound except for the immediate, close-range horror. The bus is dead silent, the engine now idling at a barely perceptible rumble. You are blinded, disoriented, your primary sense of sight replaced by the suffocating intimacy of touch and sound. And then, the bus moves. It doesn't accelerate. It makes a slight, shuddering turn off the main road, the tires crunching lightly on loose gravel. You are no longer at a scheduled bus stop. The vehicle has pulled over at a non-designated, unlit spot, a dirt access road, or a desolate service entrance to one of the dark, hulking warehouses you passed minutes ago. The sudden halt sends a minor shockwave through the frame, and it's followed by a sound that punches the air from your lungs. The passenger shifts. Not a minor adjustment, but a clear, heavy slide and thud from the seat immediately behind you. It's the sound of a great weight moving quickly and then settling again, followed by a slight metallic groan from the seat springs. The absolute rigidity of the past hour is shattered. Your anxiety tightens into a physical knot in your throat. Why stop here? Why turn off the lights? Why the shift? You try to rationalize the driver's actions, a brief rest stop, a required check of the tires, a quick bio break. But in this pitch blackness, pulled off onto an unseen road, every rational explanation is smothered by the sheer terror of the unknown. You recall the mainstream horror of the Zodiac Killer, a case whose fear persists not just because of the murders, but because the killer would often send coded, boastful letters to the press, enjoying the psychological torture of an entire region. The driver and the passenger, in their synchronized actions, the darkening of the bus, the unexplained halt, feel like they are sending you a message, a cryptic, terrifying code of complicity. In the silence after the shift, the rhythmic tapping that was confined to the seat frame now seems to have moved. It's still a light, bone-on plastic sound, but it's now coming from a different angle, lower down, near the floor and the aisle between the seats. The metallic glint you saw earlier must have been the object, and the sudden halt caused it to roll out. You think of the obscure horror tidbit of the Men in Black phenomena in ufology, not the modern comic figures, but the original, unsettling concept of anonymous, identical men who show up to suppress information, often driving large, featureless black cars. The true creep factor is that they often exhibit inhuman physical characteristics and stiff mechanical movements, like the passenger's rigidity. They appear, they enforce, and they vanish. This entire bus feels like a mobile MIB operation, and you are the information they've come to collect. You listen for the sound of the driver's door opening, the sign of a temporary break. Nothing, just the low, expectant thrum of the idling engine and the wet breathing, which is back now, deeper and more aggressive than before, like an animal settling in for a meal. You try to conjure a joke, a tiny anchor in the absurd. My friend told me that the best time to see ghosts is when the bus pulls over on an abandoned road in pitch darkness. I told him, that's just the bus driver's side hustle, haunted tours, one way only. You need to know what that shift entailed. What did the passenger reveal when their rigidity broke? You can barely make out the outline of the seats in the deep gloom, but the area directly behind you is a solid, impenetrable block of black. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still argue whether the historical accounts of poltergeist activity, noisy ghosts, are genuine manifestations of a localized, destructive psychic energy, or purely the result of unconscious psychokinetic activity generated by an anxious adolescent witness. You are currently the primary witness, and the localized psychic energy, your sheer, raw terror, is absolutely generating an external, physical event in the form of the rhythmic tapping. You can't just sit here. The non-stop, non-scheduled stop is a declaration that the rules of the journey have been suspended. The silence, the darkness, and the rhythmic sound of something hard rolling around on the floor, something that was likely contained inside the passenger's space, is an explicit invitation to panic. You reach slowly, cautiously down toward the floor, trying to trace the shape of the seat frame with your fingers, getting closer to the source of the tapping. You need to identify the object. Even a small, mundane detail, a dropped coin, a bottle cap could shatter the spell of horror and bring you back to reality. But your hand hovers, paralyzed by the fear that it will brush against the passenger's foot, or worse, whatever is attached to the source of the wet breathing. You realize you have a chance right now, a brief window while the bus is stopped, to pull the emergency cord and make a run for it. But the bus has slowed so gently that the cord is out of reach, high above your head. You have to move your entire body to reach it, and you know any sudden movement will be catastrophic. The tapping continues, louder now, as if the object has rolled closer to your feet. You brace yourself, focusing on the sheer, chilling absurdity of your situation. You are being hunted, or at least psychologically tortured, by an unnaturally rigid passenger, and the only soundtrack is the sound of something small and hard rolling on the floor. You're frozen, hands braced against the seat in front of you, listening to the tiny rolling echo of the object on the rubber floor. It seems to have settled. The tapping has ceased, replaced by a low, intermittent rattle whenever the bus engine idles unevenly. The terror is no longer external. It has been internalized, a cold, heavy lump sitting squarely in your stomach. And then you hear it. The passenger is whispering. It's an extremely low, rasping sound, barely audible over the engine's low thrum. The whisper is so close it sounds like it's coming from inside the hollow cavity of your seat back. You can't make out the words immediately. It's just a broken, sibilant chain of sound. You strain your ears, trying to locate the source in the oppressive darkness. The passenger hasn't moved again, hasn't shifted. The whisper seems to emanate from the same rigid posture. And then, as you focus your entire being on the sound, you begin to distinguish the structure of the phrases. They are not random words, they are not a conversation. The whispers are repetitive, slow, and strangely familiar. And then the chilling realization washes over you. The words are about you. The passenger is articulating your deeply suppressed internal worries. The whispers are referencing things only you could possibly know. Private anxieties, small failures you've buried, fears you haven't spoken aloud to anyone. That awful, selfish thing you thought in the middle of the night about your friend. You are so incredibly alone, aren't you? The phrases are not accusatory, they are observational, delivered in a dry, rasping tone that sounds simultaneously intimate and completely devoid of emotion. It's a chilling mimicry, a verbal manifestation of your own shadow self. You feel completely exposed, your entire inner life stripped bare and articulated inches from your ear. This is the ultimate invasion, far worse than the proximity, worse than the wet breathing. This is the mainstream horror of psychological warfare, the terror of having your own weaknesses weaponized against you. It's like the concept behind the tulpas in Tibetan Buddhism, thought forms or entities that can be created purely through mental concentration. This passenger feels like a tulpa, constructed not by its own mind, but by the negative detritus of yours. You remember an obscure tidbit about the Philip experiment, where a group of Canadian parapsychologists attempted to manufacture a ghost, Philip, through sheer collective belief and historical narrative. They managed to generate noises and taps, the rhythmic tapping you just heard. But the crucial part is that the entity only ever communicated information that the researchers already knew. The ghost was merely an echo of their own knowledge. The passenger's whispers are the ultimate proof of this principle. They are only speaking the deepest secrets of your own weary mind. You try to stand up, to break the psychological hold, but your limbs feel like lead. The darkness and the intimacy of the whispered words are a physical constraint. Scholarly debate, phrasing time. Researchers still debate whether certain forms of auditory hallucination experienced during periods of extreme stress or sleep deprivation are the brain's attempt to process suppressed information, or an indication of an external, subconscious information transfer. You are caught in the middle of this debate, desperately trying to decide if you are having a breakdown or if the passenger is somehow reading your mind and weaponizing the contents. You think of another joke, a desperate attempt to regain control. My deepest secret is that I secretly enjoy bad puns. The other one is that I might be riding a bus with the living embodiment of my student loan debt. The whispers continue, cycling through your anxieties, occasionally punctuated by that sickening, wet intake of breath. The air behind you seems to grow colder with each word. You can't stay here. You need light. You need distance. But how do you move when the words coming from behind you are the script of your own inner fear? You have to change the subject. You have to give the passenger something new to whisper about. You decide to try and project a single, overwhelming, random thought. A total non sequitur to see if the whispers shift. You concentrate all your remaining mental energy on thinking about a brightly colored object, a giant inflatable pink flamingo hovering in a blue sky. You focus on the contrast, the absurdity, the joyful, blinding pink. The wet breathing pauses, the whispers stop. You feel a momentary, terrifying vacuum of sound behind you. Then the voice returns, even lower, more rasping and far more mocking. The terrible, empty hope of pink. The passenger saw the pink flamingo. They heard the thought. The attempt failed. The passenger is not just whispering your secrets. They are listening to your attempts at escape. The air behind you drops further in temperature. It is no longer just cold. It is localized Arctic air, piercing and sharp, and it feels targeted. You realize the psychological terror of the mind reading is being immediately followed by a profound physical intrusion. The cold is next. The cold is not a draft. It is a localized, aggressive chill that feels like it's being poured directly onto the back of your head and shoulders. You feel the change immediately. an intense, localized drop in temperature that sends a piercing shiver through your entire core, even as the bus's cheap heating system continues to whine and whir, trying its best to maintain a stale, mediocre warmth. The cold is a circle, radiating from the passenger, extending perhaps 6 inches past the front of the seat. Your knees pressed against the seat in front of you are warm, your hands resting on your thighs are warm, but the space immediately surrounding your torso and head is suddenly, dramatically freezing. This chilling phenomenon is a classic element of mainstream supernatural horror, the idea that a non-physical presence can draw the ambient heat from a room to manifest. You think of the Bath school disaster, the true, horrifying crime story of a man who bombed a school in 1927, killing many children, and then drove away before blowing himself up. The horror isn't the explosion, it's the cold, calculated, and localized malice of a single individual. The cold emanating from behind you feels like that kind of calculated malice, a physical manifestation of the passenger's intent. The wet breathing, which had paused when the cold began, now returns. But it sounds different, thicker, almost vaporous, as if the air it's processing is sub-zero. FF squish frost. You try to wrap your arms around yourself, pulling your jacket closer, but the cold seems to penetrate clothing, sinking right into the bone marrow. It's an internal chill, not an external one. You remember the obscure tidbit of the fear of mirrors, isoptrophobia, which in some fringe psychological theories is less about the fear of the mirror itself, and more about the fear of seeing what's behind you. A recognition that the reflection could hold an uninvited second presence. Your fear of the mirror earlier was justified, because the passenger is bringing a profound physical change to the space only they occupy. The sheer impossibility of the cold in a small, enclosed, heated space forces you to confront the reality that this is not a person. You are not riding with a stranger. You are riding with a condition, a phenomenon, an atmospheric anomaly wearing a dark coat. The passenger's whispers, which were about your emotional history, now take on a new physical dimension. The cold truth, isn't it? The biting realization that you are fundamentally alone. The cold is making the truth palpable. You force yourself to think of a joke, any joke, to create a moment of psychological heat. I told the bus driver, "I think my seat is broken. It's leaking Arctic air." He said, "That's not a leak, sir. That's our new emotional support cryptid. He only accepts payment in existential dread and body heat." You feel a hysterical, shaky giggle bubbling up, quickly suppressed. Scholarly debate, phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the anecdotal sensation of a cold spot, often reported at alleged haunting sites, is a measurable thermodynamic event or a purely psychosomatic response triggered by the expectation of a supernatural encounter. This cold is too sharp, too precise, too localized to be psychosomatic. Your skin is crawling, literally shrinking away from the source of the chill. You know you can't endure this. The cold is quickly moving from uncomfortable to genuinely painful, a burning sensation against your chilled skin. The need to move, to stand, to break the line of sight and presence becomes an overwhelming physical imperative. You realize you must appeal to the only other known human presence on the bus, the driver. The driver who stopped on the desolate road, the driver who turned off the lights. The driver who has been utterly, frighteningly silent throughout this entire ordeal. You begin to turn your head slowly, intending to make eye contact with the driver's reflection in the front windshield, or perhaps turn fully to call out to him. You have to ask him to move, to turn on the lights, to acknowledge the impossible anomaly that is sitting behind you. As you start the movement, easing your shoulder away from the cold circle, the wet breathing ceases entirely. The tapping does not begin. There is only the low thrum of the engine, the whining of the heat, and the oppressive, localized chill. The passenger is waiting. You turn your head, eyes straining in the dark, looking for the reassuring shape of the man in the uniform, the anchor to sanity in this rolling coffin. You search for the back of his head, the glow of his dashboard lights, the comforting profile of a tired working man. You finally find his face in the light filtering in from the side window, and what you see is far worse than any specter. You find the driver's face, illuminated by the faint green and amber glow of the dashboard instruments, and you realize, with a crushing finality, that appealing to him is impossible. His eyes are fixed and glassy. He's staring straight ahead, not at the road, but through the road, as if paralyzed or seeing a destination that exists only in his mind. The light catches his pupils, and they don't seem to be focusing on anything in the physical world. His face is pale, drawn, and utterly expressionless, a mask of absolute, terrifying vacancy. His hands are resting on the wheel in a grip that looks more like a rigid extension of the plastic than a deliberate hold. He hasn't flinched, he hasn't moved. He is an automaton, an empty shell operating the controls. You call out his name, or rather, you try to. A dry, pathetic croak escapes your throat. "Sir, driver, could you turn the lights back on?" There is no response, no flicker of the eyes, no slight change in the rigid posture. He is as much a statue as the passenger behind you, only this one is steering 1,000 tons of steel down a dark, abandoned road. This silence, this non-response, is a mainstream horror classic. The complicit bystander, or the authority figure who has been neutralized. It's the terror of the Amityville Horror. The father, supposedly possessed, sitting rigid and silent in his house, allowing the evil to unfold. You realize that in the script of this night, the driver is not your lifeline, he is the silent, essential gatekeeper. The wet breathing behind you restarts immediately, a soft, triumphant "fee" squish, as if the passenger was waiting for your attempt to reach out and is now celebrating its predictable failure. You turn back, sliding down in your seat, trying to put distance between your head and the cold breathing thing. You are completely alone. Two non-human entities, one driving, one haunting, and you, the terrified, trapped audience. Do you remember an obscure tidbit about the black triangle UFOs often reported in the UK and Belgium? Silent, massive, V-shaped craft that glide over cities. The most unnerving detail is the reports that these craft are sometimes piloted not by aliens, but by human-looking silent figures who seem to be operating the vehicle with an uncanny, rigid precision, displaying no emotion or response to the world outside. The driver's glazed, fixed eyes mirror this exactly. He's not driving the bus, he's piloting a massive, dark triangle through your nightmare. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the human condition of catatonia is a purely neurobiological disorder involving motor and behavioral disturbances, or if it has deep psychological roots relating to extreme withdrawal from a perceived hostile reality. The driver and the passenger, in their synchronized rigidity, feel like two different expressions of a shared catatonic state, and you are the hostile reality they are choosing to ignore. You manage a shaky, dark joke, a desperate internal monologue, I told the bus driver. I think I'm being haunted by the guy behind me. He said, that's fine, he pays full fare. Also, I'm technically dead, so I'm required to look through you, not at you. You desperately look down, back to the floor. The tapping has been replaced by the subtle, low, intermittent rattle. You strain your eyes in the darkness, trying to see the object that rolled out from under the passenger seat, the metallic glint. It's too dark. You have to move your hand. You have to physically touch the ground. You need one solid, identifiable piece of the real world. You lower your hand slowly, millimeter by millimeter, running your fingers across the grooved rubber floor. It is cold, dusty, and slightly sticky. You move your fingers slowly backward, closer to the source of the rattle, ignoring the wet breathing that is now right against your ear. Your fingers brush against something. It is small, it is smooth, it is cold, and incredibly heavy for its size. You close your fingers around it, pulling it quickly into the sanctuary of your lap. It has a definite, unsettling shape. The instant your fingers close on the object, the wet breathing stops. The localized cold sensation immediately retracts, and the silence returns, profound and absolute, heavier than the bus itself. You've done it. You've touched something. The rolling relic is now in your hand. The direct, unavoidable confrontation is about to begin. You feel the shape of the object, and you know you must raise it to the dim light of the dashboard to see exactly what you have taken from the passenger space. The object is now in your lap, tucked under the curve of your hand. It's an anchor, a piece of tactile reality in a world of phantom chills and whispering anxieties. You lift it slowly, turning it in the faint glow filtering from the dashboard. It is a small, dark object, smooth, uniformly colored, like polished obsidian or very dark river stone. It is not metallic. The glint you saw earlier must have been a reflection on the polished surface, or perhaps the metallic rim of whatever it was contained in. But it is the shape that paralyzes you. It is slightly ovular, perfectly smooth, and heavier than any rock its size should be. You trace the edges with your thumb, and the terrifying immediate conclusion is that the shape is unmistakably biological. It is too uniform, too dense, and possesses a delicate, slight curvature that suggests a specific, contained purpose. It feels like a tooth, or perhaps a small, heavy piece of vertebrae. You are holding a rolling relic of bone, something that was either inside the passenger or was deliberately being carried and used to create the light tapping sound. The mainstream horror here is the body snatchers trope, the chilling concept that something non-human is inhabiting a human form, but they can't quite hide all the evidence. The wet breathing, the rigidity, and now this piece of heavy, polished bone. These are the flaws in the disguise, the physical remnants of whatever the passenger truly is. The silence behind you is the most terrifying thing of all. No breathing, no sound. Just the absolute expectant stillness of the passenger who knows you have their object. The confrontation is no longer indirect, it's physical, tangible, and unavoidable. You realize you must get off the bus. Now, you can't put the object back, you can't hold it. The weight of the bone feels like the physical weight of your own guilt and fear. You recall the obscure tidbit of the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany, an unsolved crime from the 1920s where an entire family and their maid were murdered with a pickaxe. The chilling part is the evidence that the killer had been living in the house for days, possibly weeks, before the murders, unseen, eating their food, sleeping in their attic. The sheer silent proximity of the lurking killer, the ultimate trespasser, mirrors the passenger. The bone in your hand feels like a piece of the pickaxe, a warning of imminent, violent closure. You look down at the floor, and your eye catches something else. A very faint, almost impossible to see track. A thin, almost invisible line of moisture leading from the passenger's seat, now pooling slightly where the object had rested. The passenger is damp, perhaps dripping, and the bone was resting in that moisture. You try one last piece of dark humor, a final act of mental defiance. Why don't cannibals eat clowns? Because they taste funny. Also, I think the passenger behind me might be an embalmer, given the bone dust and the rigidity. I should ask for a business card. You slide your fingers along the ceiling, finding the emergency signal cord. It's cold and covered in a fine layer of grime, but you have the purchase you need. You yank it down hard. A loud, sharp bing sound assaults the silence, immediately followed by a low, mechanical chime. The bus begins to slow. The driver's glazed eyes, visible in the reflection, do not flicker, but the bus obeys. It's slowing for the next stop. The bus will open its doors. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the fundamental human drive to seek novelty and information is a critical survival mechanism or a self-destructive urge to confront the unknown, often leading to unnecessary risk. You just pulled the cord, an act of sheer self-destructive risk driven by the need for novelty and information, the bone in your hand. The bus groans to a halt, the air brakes hiss. The doors open with a sharp, hydraulic sigh. You are at the next scheduled stop, a dark patch of pavement next to a massive, empty field. There are no streetlights, only the distant, sickly yellow glow of a single farmstead. You scramble out of your seat, leaping into the aisle, and bolt toward the open doors. You don't look back. You jump down onto the cold, damp pavement, the heavy, polished bone still clutched tightly in your hand. You take 3 running steps before you allow yourself to stop, turn, and look back at the bus. The driver's face is still fixed and glazed, and in the window of the seat you just vacated, the passenger is visible, framed perfectly in the dim light. They are still rigid, still covered in the dark coat, and still utterly, terrifyingly still. They haven't moved to follow you. They haven't stood up. They are merely seated, looking out at the dark field where you are now standing. The bus accelerates immediately, tires spraying a fine mist of water and gravel. It is gone in seconds, the red taillights shrinking rapidly down the long, empty road, leaving you alone in the oppressive, moonless blackness. You stand in the wet grass beside the desolate pavement, clutching the bone relic, watching the red taillights of the bus disappear into the heavy curtain of the night. The bus is gone, and the silence that replaces the engine's drone is immense. A thick, suffocating emptiness that feels even more isolating than the bus itself. You are alone on a silent, moonless stretch of road. The air is cold and carries the smell of wet earth and distant fertilizer. You throw the polished bone hard into the dark field, listening for the sound of it hitting the ground. It lands with a heavy, wet thud that confirms its unnatural density, and then the silence returns, unbroken. You don't want the relic anymore. You just want the night to be normal. You feel a wave of hysterical relief, quickly followed by the crushing realization that you are stranded miles from civilization. You check your phone, no signal. Your battery is at 4%. This is the kind of mainstream horror where the protagonist survives the initial threat, only to realize they are now in the middle of a secondary infrastructural nightmare. It's like the beginning of every slasher movie, only instead of a dilapidated cabin, you have a dead cell phone and a long, dark walk. I told the GPS, "Take me home." It replied, "Best I can do is a terrifying, isolated clearing where your anxieties become sentient." You try to walk, setting off down the road in the direction the bus was heading. You need to keep moving, to keep the blood pumping, to maintain the illusion of control. Your steps echo unnervingly on the asphalt, each footfall seeming too loud in the overwhelming silence. You look over your shoulder repeatedly, expecting to see the passenger standing right behind you in the field, rising from the wet dirt. But there is nothing, only the dark, silent expanse. You recall an obscure tidbit about the shadow people phenomenon. Interdimensional beings often described as moving rapidly in your peripheral vision, only to vanish when you look directly at them. The passenger's stillness on the bus, the ultimate lack of peripheral motion, was terrifying because it defied this rule. But now, in the open air, you feel that classic peripheral creepiness, the overwhelming sense that something is pacing you in the shadows of the tree line. You walk faster, trying to create a solid, rhythmic cadence that the silence can't break. The sound of the wind is a low, moaning whisper in the high-tension wires overhead. You tell yourself that the passenger is gone, that the bus is miles away, that the rigidity in the wet breathing were confined to that metal prison. But you can't shake the image of that rigid figure framed perfectly in the bus window, watching you jump into the night. They didn't move because they didn't need to. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the human psychological reaction to intense fear, the fight, flight, or freeze response, is a purely instinctual survival tool, or a learned, culturally mediated response based on the narratives of danger we consume. You've chosen flight, a frantic, adrenaline-fueled sprint into the next phase of the unknown. You look down the long stretch of the road, which disappears into a fog bank that has suddenly materialized a few hundred yards ahead. The fog looks thick and unnatural, a white wall that seems to pulse faintly with the distant, diffused glow of the city's light pollution. You are walking directly into the unknown. You try one last piece of dark humor to anchor yourself. "I went to a psychic to ask about my future." She just sighed and said, "Your future is an empty road, a dark fog bank, and the distinct sound of heavy boots getting closer." And then it happens. It is a sound that cuts through the silence, a sound that is both familiar and utterly, profoundly terrifying. The distinct, heavy, relentless rhythm of footsteps. They are coming from behind you. The footsteps are unmistakable. They are heavy, deliberate, and moving at a rapid, measured pace. You freeze, a cold, sickening wave of confirmation washing over you. The passenger didn't need to get off the bus immediately. They were simply waiting for the bus to put enough distance between you and the only remaining human authority, the glazed, rigid driver. You start running. It's a clumsy, panicked run on the cold, uneven asphalt, your coat flapping, your breath catching in your throat. You don't look back. You don't need to. The sound of the pursuit is a hammer blow, perfectly timed to your frantic steps. The rhythm of the footsteps is what truly chills you. It is a slow, heavy, measured cadence, not the rushed, panting gait of a desperate chase, but the tireless, mechanical pace of something that knows it will catch you eventually. Thud, 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 relentless. You think of the mainstream horror of the Slender Man mythos, the terrifying element of the entity that pursues its victims with a slow, inexorable inevitability. It's the absence of effort, the calm, terrifying certainty of the hunter. The passenger is not exerting himself. He is simply correcting the mistake of your escape. You push your limits, running until your lungs burn with the icy night air. You glance to your left, looking for any structure, any sign of shelter or human habitation. You see a low, squat building set back from the road, an old, abandoned garage or maybe a storage facility. It's surrounded by a high chain-link fence, but you spot a section where the fence has been deliberately cut and peeled back, creating a narrow, dark opening. A desperate invitation. You veer off the road, scrambling through the gap in the fence, the wire tearing at your coat. You run across the overgrown, weedy lot toward the main structure, your feet sliding on the slick, wet pavement. The footsteps follow, turning off the road, the sound of boots crunching on the gravel where you just ran. They are close, too close. You find a dark recess between two massive steel loading bay doors, a perfect, cramped, pitch-black space for cover. You squeeze into the doorway, pressing your back against the cold, rusting metal, trying to melt into the shadows. You hold your breath, your heart slamming against your ribs like a trapped bird. The footsteps stop. Not abruptly, but with a slight, deliberate pause that sounds like a final, controlled arrival. They are right outside your hiding spot, just beyond the corner of the loading bay. This is a deliberate silence, the hunter waiting for the prey to give away its position. The terror is paralyzing. You recall an obscure tidbit about the vanishing hitchhiker urban legend, where the ghost is sometimes not a hitchhiker at all, but a phantom vehicle that follows people home, only visible in the rearview mirror, finally manifesting at the doorstep. The passenger has completed this horrifying cycle, started as an uncomfortable ghost on a moving vehicle, and has now materialized as the inevitable, relentless footsteps at your door. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still debate whether the evolutionary response of playing dead or freezing in prey animals is a viable survival strategy or a purely autonomic malfunction of the nervous system. You have frozen, a primal response to the immediate, overwhelming threat, desperately hoping the passenger will pass by or assume you vanished. You dare to risk a thought, a dark, internal joke. I knew I shouldn't have worn my lucky pair of shoes tonight. They have excellent tread, which is why the sound of my running is currently being used to correct the passenger's navigational system. The seconds stretch into an unbearable eternity. The air is so still, you can hear the faint, high-pitched ping of the cooling metal of the building. And then, from the other side of a loading bay door, you hear it. Not a footstep, not a whisper. You hear the wet breathing. It's the FT squish sound, heavy and damp, and it is right there, pressed against the steel door. The passenger knows exactly where you are. They are not waiting for you to move. They are simply standing there, breathing, allowing the sound to be your final confirmation. And as you listen to the rhythmic, sickening dampness of the breath, you realize that the pace of the breathing is identical to the pace of the footsteps you just heard. The same speed, the same heavy, dragging rhythm. The footsteps were the breathing. The heavy boots were simply replicating the sound of air being pulled through a half-clogged, wet passage. You realize the true, horrifying link between the two phases of the encounter. You are trapped, flattened against the cold steel, listening to the rhythmic replication of the wet breathing right outside your flimsy hiding spot. The fifth squish that terrified you on the bus is now the sound of the relentless, pursuing footsteps, and the two have merged into a single, terrifying declaration. The passenger is not getting tired, and they are not losing your trail. You realize this is the core of the psychological torture. The passenger is using the very mechanism of life breath as the instrument of your chase. It's a chilling inversion of nature, a horrifying, mainstream, supernatural concept. You try to move your hand to your mouth, to cover your gasping breath, but you are paralyzed. The sound is so close, you feel the low-frequency vibration of the exhalation through the thin steel door. It sounds like something enormous, something pulled from the deep ocean and struggling to breathe terrestrial air. You recall the obscure tidbit about the disappearance of the Eilean Moor lighthouse keepers in the early 1900s. 3 men vanished without a trace, the only physical evidence being a large, overturned chair and a single entry in the logbook about a terrible storm that never actually appeared in weather records. The terror isn't the vanishing, it's the strange, out-of-place objects and records that defy the known environment. The passenger's dampness, rigidity, and the wet breathing are your overturned chair and fake storm entry, physical evidence that defies the reality of the heated bus and the cold night. You think of the dark joke that you desperately need right now. Why did the serial killer bring a ladder? To take his terror to new heights. Or, just to look over the loading bay door to confirm I'm hiding here like an idiot. The breathing stops again. The abrupt silence is even worse than the sound. It's the silence of a predator waiting for the slightest mistake. You know they are still there. They haven't left. You realize that every movement you make now will be an explicit invitation. You can't wait them out. This is a game of attrition, and the passenger, whatever they are, has infinite patience. You slowly, carefully press the tips of your fingers against the corner of the door, allowing them to barely peek past the edge into the open air. You can't see the passenger, but you can see the faint reflection of the distant streetlights on the wet, dark ground outside. You feel a profound sense of psychological exhaustion, the kind that breaks down all resistance. You are tired of being afraid. You are tired of running. You are tired of being the prey. Scholarly debate, phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the historical accounts of spirit possession are a genuine metaphysical occurrence or a form of extreme dissociative identity disorder fueled by religious or cultural expectations. The passenger feels like the living, breathing manifestation of a possession, an entity that has taken over a rigid host and is using it to perform the simplest, most effective act of haunting, terrifying proximity. You withdraw your fingers and lean your head back against the cold steel, deciding that the only way to end this is to confront it directly. You can't run anymore. You can't hide anymore. You need to look. You need to see the eyes, the face, the mouth that is generating that wet, sickening sound. You need to force the final, unavoidable confrontation. You need to know what you've been running from. You slowly, agonizingly begin to edge yourself out of the doorway. It takes an immense effort of will, forcing your body to move against the paralyzing inertia of terror. You move away from the sanctuary of the shadows, stepping into the sparse, low light of the abandoned lot. You stand upright, exposed, hands hanging loosely at your sides. You turn your entire body, slowly, deliberately, forcing your gaze to focus on the corner of the loading bay door, the place where the wet breathing last emanated. You stand in the exposed light, the cold air hitting your face, and force your eyes to the corner where the passenger is waiting. You are ready to look, ready to face the face of fear. The passenger steps out. It is the same figure from the bus. Tall, rigid, the dark, heavy coat seems to absorb all light, making their shape nothing more than an absence in the gloom. The head is still slightly bowed, but as they step into the faint, polluted light from the city, the passenger raises their head. You finally see the face. It is not a stranger. It is not a monster with sharpened teeth or empty sockets. It is a face that is perfectly, horrifyingly familiar. It is your face. But it is not a perfect replica. It is the grotesque manifestation of your own shadow. Your features are there, the slope of your nose, the line of your jaw, the faint curve of your mouth. The skin is unnaturally pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over the bone. The eyes are yours, but they are sunk deep into the sockets and ringed with shadows, empty of the spark of life. The mouth, which should be capable of speaking, is slightly ajar, revealing teeth that are too long, too sharp, and slightly stained. The wet, rhythmic sound is coming from this face, the air being pulled in through a mouth that seems too eager, too unnatural, to breathe. The passenger is the physical manifestation of your own exhaustion, your paranoia, your buried anxiety. It is the part of you that knows your deepest secrets, that wanted you to stay on the bus in the dark, rigid, and unmoving, because it is the only way it can sustain itself. The mainstream horror here is the fear of the self. The idea that the greatest monster we face is the one staring back from the mirror. This is the ultimate confrontation, the recognition that your greatest fear rode the bus with you, tracked you across the fields and cornered you in the darkness, all because you invited it with your loneliness and your overwhelming dread. The passenger doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. It simply raises one hand, a slow, unnatural movement from within the heavy coat. The hand is thin and pale, and the fingers are long, ending in nails that are too dark and too sharp. The hand reaches out toward you. You realize the implication of the confrontation. You cannot run from yourself. You cannot escape your shadow. The only way to survive is to submit, to let the shadow merge back into the host. You recall an obscure tidbit about sleep paralysis demons, the shadow figures that people often report seeing while trapped between wakefulness and sleep. The chilling detail is that these figures often physically mirror the patient's anxiety and are perceived as sitting on the chest, preventing movement and breathing. The passenger behind you was a sleep paralysis demon, sitting on the chest of your consciousness, only now you are fully awake and the demon is real. You try to move, to flee, but the catatonic rigidity that held the driver and the passenger now grips you. You are locked in place, staring at the monstrous, exhausted reflection of yourself. You manage one last internal joke, a dry, terrible whisper. I finally get it. The passenger who sat behind me on an empty bus was just my existential dread trying to hitch a ride home. He just wanted to tell me my life was a disaster, but he had terrible social skills. Scholarly debate phrasing time. Researchers still disagree on whether the psychological drive towards self-sabotage is a maladaptive defense mechanism rooted in a fear of success, or a necessary cyclical process of destruction required for ultimate psychological rebirth. The passenger is your self-sabotage, and the hand reaching out is the mechanism of your destruction, or perhaps your rebirth. The passenger takes one step forward. The wet breathing, the squish, is loud now, filling the entire empty space of the lot. The sound is not terrifying anymore, it is just loud. You close your eyes, accepting the inevitable proximity, ready for the touch, ready for the embrace of your own internalized fear. The cold air envelops you again, sharp and biting. You wait for the touch to finish the night. The cold is there, just touching the edge of your consciousness, a thin line of icy realization running down your spine. You're not moving. You can't move. The fear has turned into something soft and heavy, like thick velvet settled over your limbs. Just breathe, now. The sound of the wet breathing is starting to fade. It's no longer aggressive, no longer a relentless rhythm of pursuit. It's becoming indistinct, merging with the background hum of the night. It's becoming the sound of the wind sighing over the steel roof of the abandoned building. It's the sound of the world outside, turning, shifting, and settling back down. You open your eyes, and the darkness is softer now. It's not the oppressive, hungry blackness of the bus. It's the gentle, familiar dark of a quiet night. You look around the empty lot, the shadows retreating back into the corners. The passenger is gone. The rigid, pale reflection of yourself has dissolved into the shadows, melting away from the light of your momentary recognition. The chase is over. The journey has ended. It's always like this, isn't it? The biggest fears, the ones that feel so terrifyingly real, are the ones that only exist when you are alone, vulnerable, and exhausted. They ride the bus with you. They sit too close. They whisper your secrets. They borrow your face. But they cannot stand the light, and they cannot stand the silence once the fear has run its course. That's all they are, the accumulated anxieties of a long day, given a coat and a set of heavy, breathing boots. You had to jump off the bus. You had to run. You had to confront the terrible, frozen image of your own shadow in the dark. And now, the space is empty again. You survived the panic. You survived the chase. You survived yourself. The cold is receding. You can feel the warmth returning to your fingers, the slow, rhythmic beat of your own heart replacing the frantic hammering. You can go home now. Or maybe you were home all along, and the bus was just a momentary lapse, a dreamlike detour through the